Hello, I'm Robert Griffin, the Executive Minister here at the Sunshine Cathedral in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I want to thank you for joining us for worship via the internet today. And if you are ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, let me personally invite you to stop by and worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30 a.m. We also invite you to join us on our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter. But for this moment, let's go inside and see what exciting worship opportunity lay in store for us.
Our first reading this morning is from the Wisdom of Aristotle. Of all the varieties of virtue, generosity is the most beloved. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Our second reading is from the Wisdom of the Book of Proverbs. Those who give freely seem to enjoy more. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
And our third reading is from the Wisdom of Susie Orman. True generosity is an offering, giving freely and out of pure love, no strings attached. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Our fourth reading is a reading from the Gospel according to Mark. Jesus sat down opposite the collection and watched the crowd putting money into it. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than anyone else. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she gave all that she possibly could." In these human words, God's voice is heard.
So yes, Robert and I joined the staff of the Sunshine Cathedral 9 years ago, and then a year later, I was installed as the senior minister on November the 3rd, 2007. So it's always startling for me to hear that, because it seems not to have been that long. It seems to what is the saying? The days are long and the years are short. So I'm amazed that it's been that long, and I'm glad to be here still, especially this week, because it's been a very busy week in the world. And whenever the world is busy with agitation, busy with just frenetic activity, busy with reaction to things, that's when I think our presence is needed most of all. Our witness, the words we have to share, the community we continuously try to build. We keep hearing about the decline of religion. We keep hearing how once juggernaut denominations have stagnated and mainline denominations are in decline, that some megachurches have completely toppled, and only just a few years ago, we were stunned to learn that the 4th largest and fastest growing religious group in the country was the non-religious, the nuns and the duns, we called them. And they were at 16% of the population. And in just 7 years, that has grown to 23%. And I think part of the reason is because religion has too often been silent in the face of oppression. And that's, of course, when it hasn't been on board with oppression. And so we've got a lot of work to do. We have got a lot of work to do, that as generations continue to have to retire, to need nursing care, and eventually depart this earth, if they are not being replaced with new people, then of course institutions are in trouble. That's less of a problem than the people not being served by institutions at their best. That's what I'm most worried about. And this week, just in the world, we've seen why a positive witness is so desperately needed, why someone standing up and trying to call people together to be a positive witness, a life-giving voice, is so needed. The National Religious Liberties Conference You ever heard of that? Or remember of anyone? Did anyone attend that? It was Friday and Saturday. The National Religious Liberties Conference was held over the weekend in Des Moines. Of course it was. I guess Oklahoma City was just all booked up. The conference was reportedly organized by a man who has called for the execution of same-gender loving people. Isn't that nice? The Religious Liberties Conference, headed by someone calling for the death of LGBT people. Gives you a warm feeling inside, doesn't it? And hopefully, he means for his rhetoric to be hyperbolic. Hopefully he's just trying to get people sort of worked up and agitated so that they'll come to his conference or support his causes or give money to whatever he thinks is important. But such dehumanizing and violent language all too often leads to violent behavior. When we dehumanize and demonize entire groups of people, then their neighbors do sometimes stop seeing them as human. And then they treat them in ways that are inhuman. And so that kind of rhetoric is problematic. The Religious Liberties Conference probably really doesn't have much to do with religious liberties. We are in this country free to worship where and when we wish. And as the statistics show, the Pew Research shows, fewer and fewer people wish. And we are trying to offer healthy alternatives so that they will wish to express and experience religious community again. But in any case, we are free to worship when and how and where we wish. And we are free to believe whatever we find compelling. And we are even free to make our religious affiliations public. We can wear Stars of David and crosses. We can carry our Bibles anywhere we want to go. We can hang rosaries from our rearview mirrors. We can put all kinds of bumper stickers on our cars. We can wear lapel pins. We can make a big showing of who we are if we wish. We can decorate our lawns with all kinds of religious things. We are free to do that. But if we wish to treat tax-supported public property as if it were our own sacred space, or if we try to legislate our religious beliefs in an attempt to force them on others, then there will be pushback. Not everyone appreciates that. And not letting one religion have the force of law in all of our lives is not a denial of religious liberty. It is resistance to religious tyranny. Now, I'm not terribly shocked that there are people who want to use religion as a weapon of anti-gay oppression. There have always been people who have used religion as a weapon to beat people up. There have always been people who used religion to keep women from having sovereignty of their own bodies, to keep people trapped in unsafe or unhealthy marriages, to not hold people accountable for child abuse or child labor. There's always been people who have used religion to justify their racist opinions or to try to enforce their prejudices on others, to keep people in the margins. There have always been people who have tried to use religion or scripture to justify the divine right of kings or the exceptionalism of one nation over all others. So that someone would try to use religion to keep other people in their place. Nothing new. Not terribly shocked even that like-minded people gather together for conferences where they can hear how they are better than everyone else, how they are right, how they are God's chosen, and still somehow how they are being oppressed by not being able to legislate against everyone else. I'm not surprised that people buy plane tickets and reserve hotel rooms and pay conference fees just to hear how everyone else is bad. It has ever been thus. But I am concerned that 3 presidential hopefuls attended that conference, a conference organized by someone calling for violence against anyone. And by the way, the person who organized this conference is a radio shock jock. It's sort of his job to say outrageous things. But he's not the only one to call for violence against LGBT people. 2 of the speakers at the conference were fundamentalist pastors, also calling for violence against LGBT people. And some of the leaders of the conference and speakers not only were calling for that sort of reprehensible behavior in the United States, but were supporters of Ugandan legislation, which criminalizes same-gender loving relationships. Marriage equality was a huge victory in this country. But a conference in Des Moines shows that the war on human dignity, on equal rights, on LGBT safety is not yet over. In fact, in some ways, it may be getting uglier than ever. Also in the last week, there was an attack on the children of same-gender loving parents. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Inc., reaffirmed last week its opposition to marriage equality and its refusal to perform same-sex weddings, which is their right. That is not my complaint today. But beyond their condemnation of marriage equality and their refusal to sanction same-sex weddings, they took the added step of saying that a biological or adopted child of a parent living in a same-gender loving relationship will not be allowed to be baptized in the LDS Church. Not allowed to be baptized until that child becomes an adult at 18. But even then, that young person cannot be baptized until they leave their parents' home and disavows the practice of same-gender cohabitation or marriage. In other words, the children of gay parents will be denied the sacrament of baptism, and even as adults will be denied if they don't publicly condemn their parents and their relationships. How's that for family values? Now, the LDS has a lot of rich spirituality, and I don't, and if that is anyone's tradition, I'm sure you got something wonderful from it. And the LDS is free to practice their religion however they choose. While I believe these recent actions are draconian, they are not trying to force anything on anyone outside the walls of their own churches. So there's that. But still, my heart breaks for the families that will be torn apart by this dehumanizing policy. But wait, there's more. Houston, Texas, the fourth largest city in our country, voted last week on whether they would extend protections to 15 groups of people. 15 groups of people, that's a lot of folks that would be offered equal protection in the city. The Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, or HERO they were calling it, would have protected from discrimination gays and lesbians, and transgender people, and veterans, and the elderly, and women, and ethnic minorities, and people with disabilities, and so on. However, opponents of equality successfully launched a media campaign telling people that protecting transgender people would give men an excuse to dress as women and assault women in public restrooms. They just made it up. That wasn't in the bill. That wasn't in the ordinance. And guess what? If some nefarious criminal ne'er-do-well wants to don a costume, they could do it before the ordinance and since. There was nothing. No one is protected from bad people dressing up any way they want and doing bad things. And I'm not as familiar, I'm not as up-to-date on the latest sociological data as I was when I was a sociology major many, many decades ago. But I've never heard of the transgender community being particularly violent. It was insulting, it was dehumanizing, it was degrading to reduce transgender people to wearing a costume, to playing dress-up, to mean people just wanting to dress in a certain way to do mean things. The fear-mongering was despicable. The ignorance was astounding. And the HERO ordinance failed. And fundamentalists celebrated all over social media the next day, congratulating themselves on taking a stand for morality. They humiliated an entire group of people. They denied equal protection to 15 groups of people, and they praised themselves and Jesus for doing so. But slander and discrimination are not the paths of the moral high ground. Ignorance, apathy, and hatred conspired to defeat equal protection in Houston, and people of conscience and character cannot remain silent about that tragic fact. And finally, and this may be most disturbing of all to me, I want to tell you about a petition that is circulating on the internet calling for LGBTQ organizations to stop serving the transgender community, to stop affiliating with transgender causes, to stop serving their needs, to basically not call it the LGBTQ community, but only the LBG, and if that were to fly, I'm sure the B would go eventually. And then, of course, the next step would be to separate the L and the G, so that we would just all be different groups, self-serving, fighting, and of course, being picked off one by one. If you see that petition, I beg you to refuse to sign it, and further, I hope you will denounce it at every opportunity. I'm proud to say that GLAAD has denounced it. I'm proud to say that the HRC has denounced it. I am proud to say that we at the Sunshine Cathedral are denouncing it. It is wrong. It is bad. It is myopic. It is not who we are. A conference organized by people who call for violence against gays. A denomination denying sacraments to children who have same-gender loving parents. A major city denying equal rights protections to veterans and disabled people, to people of various racial, ethnic, and national backgrounds, to deny protections even to people of various religious expressions, all to prevent transgender people from having legal protections. And a petition trying to get gays and lesbians and bisexuals to distance themselves from transgender people. And all of that happened in just 1 week. All of that attached some way to religious verbiage, and we wonder why religion is less and less compelling to people of goodwill more and more. How did we ever become so fearful, so unkind, so lacking in human compassion, so disinterested in justice, so inflexible, so unwilling to share something as basic as dignity with our fellow human beings? And how did religion become part of the problem instead of the possible cure? Well, I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know this. We may not have all the answers. We may not be able to fix all the problems, but I make a promise to myself, to you, my sisters and brothers, and to the all-inclusive love that I call God, that I will use whatever influence I have to make sure that this different kind of church will always be a voice of hope for the hopeless, a voice calling for peace in a battle-weary world, a voice demanding justice for the marginalized, a voice affirming the sacred value of all people. We can do that much. We can offer at least that much. We can be the place that will not participate in the fear-mongering, and the place that will offer a counter-narrative saying you are God's miracle and not God's mistake. We can give that. A beggar who couldn't walk once approached the Apostle Peter. The beggar wanted some money, and Peter didn't have any money. Not that day, anyway. You see, he had left his lucrative fishing career to enter ministry, And you can ask Reverend Ann how that goes. Or Minister Ty or Reverend Walt. Thank God I never made any money, but they actually gave it a lot up to do this. So Peter didn't have any, but Peter had compassion. Peter saw the dignity in another person. Peter saw the need. And so just because he didn't have money didn't mean that he couldn't do something. And so Peter told the person begging for money, he said, I don't have any coins to give you, but what I do have, I share with you. And on the spot, Peter prayed for the man's healing. And according to the story, this person who hadn't been able to walk was healed. We can't fix every problem, but we can share what we have. We can share hope and compassion. And as we do so, we will be part of healing our hurting and fractured world. And that's what the gospel story that we heard is about. Deacon Lydia read that story about the familiar widow giving her 2 little coins, the so-called widow's mite. In that story, we see a woman giving all she has to the temple treasury, making a pilgrimage, worshiping, and giving all she can. She doesn't have much. By itself, it would almost not even matter. But she wants to give what she can and combine it with what everyone else is giving so that it can make a difference. She wants to give whatever she can. And from her limited resources, she wants to share. And Jesus notices the woman and praises her. But he was not only praising one woman's generous spirit, he was also criticizing a system that would allow the woman to have so little. In Mark chapter 12, verse 40, Jesus calls out those who, in his words, devour widows' homes. Those who try to take away the safety net from the elderly. Those who rob pension funds. Those who want people who work hard to work even longer so that they can have a less secure pension at the end. Jesus calls out those who rob, devour widows' homes. And the very next verse, verse 41, begins the story that Deacon Lydia read to us today. The woman giving, the widow, the poor widow, giving all she can. Those aren't 2 different stories. It is a continuation of the same thought. How can a world where some can have so much allow people like this widow to have so little? And how can people who have so little still want to do all that they can? It is an in-your-face sort of message. Today, Jesus' question might be, how can heterosexuals who can love and marry whomever they choose wish to deny that right and that joy to same-gender loving people? Or Jesus' question today might be, how can gays and lesbians who have finally won marriage equality not be willing to help their transgender friends and neighbors achieve fairness in their lives? And let us remember that many transgender people are also gay or lesbian. How, Jesus might ask today, can people who love their children not be concerned about the safety of everyone's children? Or you might ask, how can those who are enriched by sacramental worship deny sacraments to anyone? How can those who have be so indifferent or unkind to those who have not? The Sunshine Cathedral, for the last 8 years, has had a goal of developing a culture of generosity. And we have gotten better and better and better at it. In our church here in Fort Lauderdale, we have a member who in the early days of the AIDS epidemic took men who were dying into her home, and she cared for them. And even after she no longer needed to provide that particular service, she continued to volunteer here at the church several days a week. And when her health would no longer allow her to do that, she continued to be a greeter at the front door in her wheelchair. She was at the first service this morning. Sunshine Cathedral's own Grace Tedder, a model of generous living. We have members who collect food for food banks. and clothes for shelters, who volunteer for hospitals and food banks and thrift shops, who ride and walk for AIDS and breast cancer, who sponsor people in Alcoholics Anonymous, who work as social workers and nurses, who volunteer in various areas of the church in addition to making financial contributions to our ministry. They are doing what the story of the widow's mite encourages people to do. They are sharing lovingly, generously, and consistently, and it makes a difference. It's one of the ways that we worship. I would even argue it is the primary way that we worship. We sometimes argue about what song we sing, or about what passages we read, or about where the candles go, or about when we do or don't wear vestments, and I promise you none of that is improving anyone's lives. We do it because we like it, and it doesn't cost us anything to put on a great show, but that's not worship. Worship is when we see God in someone else and minister to that God in that person. The ministry, the worship is what Peter did when Peter says, I don't have money to give you, but I'll give you whatever I can. I will not walk past you. I will see your dignity and affirm it right here and now. That is worship. That is the worship of generosity, and it saves lives. It makes a difference. We worship God by serving God in others, and I am proud that this church is doing that in so many ways, looking for more ways to do it. Thank you, Sunshine Cathedral, for all that you do. Generous people will not demonize the transgender children of God. Generous people will not call for violence against gays or anyone else. Not in this or any country. Generous people will not use children as weapons against their own parents. Generous people will wish for all people to be treated fairly. Generous people will try to dismantle systems of oppression. The best spiritual witness is a life of generosity, a life of giving, a life of serving, a life of seeing dignity in others and calling it forth. We are growing ever more deeply into that profound witness as the Sunshine Cathedral. And sometimes what we can do individually or even collectively, sometimes what we can do may seem like tossing a couple of pennies in a pot. But let's do it anyway. Let's do whatever we can, whenever we can, because when enough of us do what we can, miracles happen. By supporting this different kind of church, however we can, we are making a difference, and this is the much needed good news. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today here at the Sunshine Cathedral. If you're ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, we invite you to stop by and worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30 a.m. If you'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Cathedral, or if you'd like to find out other resources that the Cathedral has to offer, please visit us at www.sunshinecathedral.org. Until the next time, we look forward to seeing you here at the Sunshine Cathedral.